Hello and welcome to Dialogue of Civilisations. There is an adage loosely attributed to the ancient Romans stating that quite often in life and politics, the circumstances surrounding a man's death, or rather the manner in which one reacts to one's ultimate end, defines him more than anything else, perhaps even more than his entire life. In the same way, it could be said that, in the case of elected politicians, their last-ditch efforts to salvage their legacy reveal those fundamental essentials about them that might not have been so discernible long before their political end was near. Today, just on the eve of Donald Trump's official re-ascendance to power, the legacy of the man who preceded him as US President is what I intend to discuss. The question of the day is how Joe Biden will be remembered. What will his legacy signify for his own country and the world at large? And my guest today is Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, former Spanish diplomat, politician and former member of the Spanish Parliament as well. He's a professor of political science, author of many books on geopolitics and foreign policy. Ambassador Aristegui, honored to welcome you again on Dialogue of Civilisations.
It's my pleasure and my honor to be with you.
Thank you very much. First of all, let's begin our conversation with a general inquiry. I guess we all understand that politicians have a fundamental interest in cultivating a positive and enduring legacy, being acutely conscious of the fact that memories of them will influence policy debates long after they leave office. What are those limits curbing one's ability in shaping one's legacy? To what extent one's legacy as a politician could sort of predetermined by certain actions taken by a politician himself during his time in office?
If you allow me, I will start with a quotation of a very misquoted and very brilliant theologian and writer of the 19th century of the United States called James Freeman Clarke. James Freeman Clarke used to say that famous phrase that has been misquoted and attributed to Bismarck, that the difference between a statesman and a politician is that the politician is concerned about the next election and the statesman is concerned about the next generation. Mm-hmm. So this is exactly the same thing. The legacy varies between a politician and a statesman. The politician normally does not have a legacy. The politician has only been looking for and trying to pursue the victory in the next election, and if he is defeated, he will not be remembered for hardly anything. And second thing that we need to analyze here is the sharp drop in the quality of the political class, what used to be called the political elite, which doesn't exist in my opinion anymore. If you compare the last time that the world was living in a period of uncertainty and a period of instability and a period of the unknown right in front of your eyes was at the end of the 20th century. If you see the political class that was ruling in those days, the quality of that political class doesn't exist today. You had in Germany the successive leaders of amazing depth and weight, Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, and Helmut Kohl. In France, there was François Mitterrand. In the United Kingdom, there was Margaret Thatcher. In the United States, there was Ronald Reagan. And nothing of the sort is the case today. So actually, if you believe that there is a legacy, you would probably find a legacy in people of this caliber. You will not find a legacy in people of today's caliber. What your second question was, what will President Biden be remembered for? Well, it is obvious that he has been trying to, ever since that he decided not to run, or he was forced not to run, better said, when the opinion polls were strongly against the Democratic Party. One has to understand that in the United States of America, a very curious and worrying phenomenon has happened. On the one hand, the extremes have penetrated, and conquered a part of the mainstream parties. A lot of people say, well, in the United States, You don't have socialists. In the United States, you do not have an extreme right wing, but the extreme right wing has come into the right wing of the Republican Party, and socialists and even Marxists have conquered positions of power in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party today, under the leadership of President Biden, is a divided party. You have the extreme left wing, Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, Cory Bush, Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, etc., etc. And then you have people that are very conservative in the Republican side. The thing that is happening also as we speak is that the conservative side of the Republican Party has also been divided. And it has been divided because, of course, the incoming president, President Trump, has been supported by the hard right of the Republican Party, and the accession to positions of influence of people like Elon Musk or Mr. Ramaswamy have confronted the Republican Party with a new reality, that there are people of great influence in the conservative spheres that are not politicians. And then again, this would be the third part of my response to your question. Can a politician control his legacy? No. And what will President Biden be remembered for? He hopes that he will be remembered for peace in the Middle East. But peace in the Middle East really was a number of circumstances that have coincided in time and that have been catalyzed by the fact that President Trump is coming into power. One is the collapse of the Syrian regime that we have analyzed here in your program in the past. Second is the weakening of Iran. Third is the strong position that right now Turkey is exerting in Syria and in the northern part of the Middle East. Fourth, and very importantly, Hezbollah has been weakened as a consequence of everything else. And fifth, and not less important, there is a very specific political party problem in Israel, which is the, let's call it, survival, political and judicial, of Prime Minister Netanyahu, that needed in some way, of course, they needed to respond to the atrocious attack of October 7th, but it has, in my opinion, and many analysts, been artificially extended, probably to favor Mr. Netanyahu's wiggling out of his very complicated judicial situation.
Well, thank you very much for a very extensive reply, Ambassador Aristegui. When you just referred to that particular quote, I remembered a famous literary character, Sir Humphrey Appleby, the civil servant from the Yes Minister sitcom, who once said that, I think he referred to somebody saying that the distinction between diplomat and a politician is that diplomat cares about the survival until the next century, whereas a politician until next Friday afternoon. Back to the Biden administration and the legacy question. We talked about those last-ditch efforts. What does those steps described as last-ditch efforts aimed at addressing global issues related to Gaza deal and so forth reveal about the nature of Biden administration and Biden himself in principle? Do they, those steps, I talk about those last-ditch efforts, do they signify incompetence, belatedness, desire to add some superficial cosmetic things to the picture, or rather something else? And also, of course, I would like to understand the nature of those measures, of course. Should we view them as really last-ditch, last-minute measures, or rather measures taken in coordination with the incoming administration and therefore in the context of wider continuity between two different administrations?
You see, I think that you have hit the nail in the head, and let me begin with your last comment. The present success of the ceasefire agreement that is going to be coming in effect early morning of Sunday, that is in some hours, is the joint effort of many actors that have different roles in importance and intensity. I would underline the importance of the role of Qatar. Qatar that has been pursuing relentlessly a role of mediator, quite successfully in some cases, and not as successfully in other cases, not because they were not good at what they were doing, but because the situation was almost impossible. And that was the case of Afghanistan that I will analyze after this. Second, of course, the Egyptians, in spite of the fact that President Sisi is allergic to or has a huge antagonism with the ideology itself that is common with the deposed President Morsi and Hamas, that are both, let's call them offshoots, sons, products of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that, as you know, is banned in Egypt. The third thing, or the third factor that is essential to the peace agreement right now is President Trump, who has very clearly said that he will not accept the continuity of the war in Gaza, the operations in Lebanon against Hezbollah, and even the war in Ukraine under his watch. So everybody knew that they had to do everything possible before Monday, January 20th. There is one more person that I would wish to underline his competence, as opposed to the incompetence that you've referred to, and I think that it is absolutely pertinent to have referred to. The competence, the solidness, the vision, and the hard work of Secretary of State Blinken, who has risen above his office, has risen above partisanship, has risen above the huge divide that exists and polarization that exists in the United States today. You cannot say that Anthony Blinken is a Democrat or Republican. Anthony Blinken is at the service of his country, at the service of peace in the world. But quite frankly, all of the things that have been signed between Israel and Hamas now for this peace accord, coming into effect 7:30 a.m. local time on Sunday in some hours, are exactly the same conditions that Qatar very ably had been trying to impose and failed to impose because it wasn't the right moment, it wasn't the right time, and there was no President Trump coming into office putting pressure into the situation. And last but not least, the measures, as you very well put it, were constantly coordinated. I would like to make reference to the confirmation hearing in the Foreign Relations Committee of the United States Senate of Senator Marco Rubio, whom I know personally in my years as a member of parliament. We were members of the Spain-USA Council. He speaks perfect Spanish, besides, of course, his flawless English. And Senator Marco Rubio was also a member of the prayer breakfast that I started in Spain, and that is a very important political meeting in February in the United States since the early 50s and President Eisenhower. Senator Rubio was absolutely flawless in his intervention in the Foreign Relations Committee. Extremely well structured intervention with a very balanced and a very clear message of reason, of statesmanship, and a certain continuity with his predecessor, Secretary Blinken. Marco Rubio said that the measures and the peace process that was ongoing, the peace negotiations, had been permanently coordinated between Secretary of State Blinken, President Biden, President-elect Bush, and himself. That they were absolutely informed by the outgoing administration, by the second. And let me tell you, last but not least, that sometimes administrations have a public position that is not really what they do in reality under the table or behind the scenes. Some very important officials of the State of Israel have been going constantly to Qatar to meet with Qatari officials and to meet with the mediators that were taking the message to Hamas. And it must be said that beyond what has been, in my opinion, wrongly said about Qatar, Qatar has bent over backwards and walked the extra mile to put pressure on Hamas so that Hamas would accept the terms and conditions of the ceasefire that has been agreed.
And specifically about Ukraine, we remember that after Trump was elected, there was some talk that within this interregnum period between the election of Donald Trump and between the point wherein he would assume his presidency, there was an opportunity for the Biden administration to do something drastic and tangible about the situation in Ukraine. Would you explain the lack of those measures with the necessity of following the principle of continuity as well?
Well, you see, in your previous questions, there was a very important comment that you made. It was about the incompetence of administrations that lead to situations that apparently have no connection. And you will recall that I made reference to the situation in Afghanistan. The withdrawal, or the so-called withdrawal of American troops in Afghanistan that was carried out by the Biden administration was shameful, was precipitated, was unplanned, and had grave consequences for Afghanistan, for the region, for the image of the United States of America, and in my opinion, and the opinion of many other experts that I have consulted personally or reading their comments, it was and it led to the situation in Ukraine. The Russians read what happened in Afghanistan as a sign of weakness from the United States of America and thought that that meant that it was now or never for them. And this is not something that happened, overnight. Many times when you study history, when you analyze things, you tend to put or to give dates. For example, we will all say that Sunday, January 19th, 2025 was the beginning of a truce or ceasefire that led eventually to peace and the reconstruction of Gaza, but that's not the case. Exactly the same thing happens to the expansionist, in my opinion, policies of the Russian Federation, because in 2008, Russia invaded and broke away two provinces of Georgia, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia, with the world hardly reacting to that. They invented, again, a pro-Russian or an anti-Georgian minority that wanted to break away and painted the situation as a separatist role. Then that, 2008, led to Russia invading, taking over, and annexing Crimea. That had a little stronger reaction from the world international community, and some sanctions were imposed, perfectly useless and without real effect. Remember that in the middle of that period of sanctions, Nord Stream 2 was built, and the West, especially Europe and the industrialized nations of the West, were completely doped, or if you want, became junkies, drug addicts of the cheap oil and gas coming from Russia, and they simply acted in a passive way that led to the disaster of the war in Ukraine. So the war in Ukraine is, of course, the fault of a nationalistic point of view and probably internal problems of President Putin himself that needed an external conflict to show and strengthen his internal position in front of the military and his own coalition of power, his party and allies. And secondly, because the weakness that was being shown by Western Europe by accepting everything from Russia, from the annexation of Abkhazia and South Ossetia to the invasion and annexation of Crimea, and the invasion of huge sectors of Ukraine itself before the war itself started, that also culminated or was, if you want, boosted by the fact that the shameful, I would say, fleeing, because it wasn't a withdrawal, of American troops, completely chaotically carried out by the Biden administration when it happened, led to the present administration. There's another consequence of this, which is the reading of the situation that China is doing. And let's not forget one thing that geopolitically is very important to understand. You see, the two greatest, let's say, antagonists or rivals of the United States and Western powers, which the West does not call enemies, but that they do call the West and the United States enemies, China and Russia, have a problem of access to free international deep waters. The Russians' Black Sea Fleet has to go through the Dardanelles Strait and the Strait of Bosphorus into the Marmara Sea and then into national territorial waters of Turkey, NATO country, Greece, NATO country, and then in the Mediterranean, where you have countries that are members of the European Union, like Cyprus, or both NATO and the European Union, as is the case of Malta, France, Italy, Spain. The Pacific Fleet of Russia in Murmansk, in Vladivostok, right exactly in front of where I am right now in Sapporo, in the northern island of Hokkaido. That part of the Pacific Ocean is like a lake, and the Eastern Fleet, the Pacific Fleet of Russia, has necessarily to go through the control of two Western allies, South Korea and Japan. And finally, the only natural way out for the Russian fleet, bearing in mind that the Baltic Sea has 9 shoring countries, and that 8 of those shoring countries are members of NATO, and the 9th is Russia. The Baltic fleet needs to go out through the Baltic Sea, controlled by all NATO countries. So the only bases are the northern bases near Murmansk, the submarine base, and the Severomorsk fleet base. This is why the Greenland thing has been brought up to the political discussion today, because whoever controls Greenland will give Russia and China access to the Western North Atlantic. This is exactly what we're talking about.
Ambassador Aristegui, thank you very much indeed for explaining this intricate landscape in a very detailed way. My last question will be very basic, and in particular after your detailed explanation, it will look incredibly simple and perhaps even vulgar, but still I feel obliged to put it to you. By and large, on the basis of what has happened over the past 5 years, could we say that US of today, United States of 2025, is a diminished version of the nation's 2016's edition?
I don't know if we could call the United States a diminished version of 2016. It would probably be a diminished version of the United States of the beginning of the 21st century. But I think that unlike the Chinese geopolitical and geostrategic analysis and geoeconomic analysis, because we tend to forget that geoeconomics is an essential part of world peace and stability. Today I'll go in that direction a little later. The United States of America still has the strongest economy in the world, still has the strongest military in the world, and still has the largest group of allies in the world. The United States is not only a part of NATO, but has a strong strategic alliance with some countries that are not members of NATO. And people tend to forget this very strong alliance of the United States with countries that are not members of NATO and that are very important countries strategically, economically, financially, and geostrategically. Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, among many others. This makes the strength of the United States a phenomenal power to be reckoned with. Today, there is a very interesting rivalry, I wouldn't even call it. I would call it even despise, if you don't mind me saying. The Chinese regard their circumstantial friendship and circumstantial alliance with the Russians as the alliance of a superior, more powerful partner themselves, who they themselves consider themselves as a global power, as opposed to a diminishing power that is very powerful militarily, okay, that has a very important military defense industry, which is really it is the second most important in the world, no matter what the Chinese are doing to advance in military industry and defense systems, which is Russia. And this can provoke some kind of friction in the future. And let's not forget that the longest land border in the world is the land border that divides China and Russia. And that today there is a very, very important Chinese presence in all of Siberia, and that this Chinese presence is not a regular legal presence. It is the fruit of, let's call it, irregular crossings of Chinese citizens into Russia and into their eastern provinces. And last but not least, it is extremely important to understand that the United States will be the dominant military force and economic force in spite of the efforts that China is trying to make to become the world domination power. And they're not only doing it by expanding the force and the presence of their armed forces. Look at the difference of philosophy of the armed forces of China. 20, 30 years ago, the armed forces of China were inward looking, and they were an element of internal cohesion and vertebration of the nation. And today they are armed forces of projection of force. And coming back to the strangulation of the access to deep waters and international waters, China has problems of their own. It has a very shallow continental platform that makes the bases along the coast of China, especially when they launch submarines, both attack submarines and ballistic missile submarines, are more or less easily controllable by the satellites of the United States of America. Bizarrely enough, the country that has, or the nation, or the territory that has direct access to the deep waters of the Pacific is Taiwan. So besides the nationalistic revendications of China over Taiwan, the geostrategic, geopolitical, and military reasons that are pushing China to try to invade and take over Taiwan so that they can build a very big naval base in the eastern part of the island to have access to deep waters of the Pacific and not be controlled by the American satellites. This is the reality of the situation. And lastly, the problem is going to be as follows. The Chinese have been using finance, commerce, trade, investment, and all of these things in different parts of the developing world with very clear strings attached to aid for development, building infrastructure, and soft loans. The other is trying to take control of critical raw materials on the one hand, the source of energy on the second, and thirdly, rare earth. Do not forget that China is the first exporter in the world of rare earth, but it is doing whatever it can to get their hands on white gold. What is white gold? It's lithium. And if you see, even in Afghanistan, and the sources of lithium in Afghanistan are controlled by China, and they're controlling the sources of lithium in Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. This is the real core issue of the battle and the rivalry between China and the United States. But China has two very serious problems. One is the weakness of some of their banks that could very easily create a new world economic crisis. And the second thing is that the navigational reality of China, in spite of its expansionist attitudes and policies in the South China Sea and the String of Pearls, and trying to gain access into the Western Pacific, is that 80% of its trade goes through the Strait of Malacca, exports and imports, including energy. And all of the nations that are on the shores of the Strait of Malacca are either allies of the West or the United States, or they are enemies or antagonists or rivals of China. So if push comes to shove and things go in a very bad direction, let's hope it won't happen, any of these nations, in coordination with the West, could block the Strait of Malacca and seriously choke the Chinese economy. The Chinese know this, and this, far from preventing a future confrontation between China and the United States, could probably fuel it.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Aristegui. Thank you very much indeed. I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful that I cannot explain to you how grateful I am in words. Most grateful. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and looking forward to...
It was my pleasure.
This pleasure was entirely ours. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
There was Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, former Spanish diplomat, politician, member of parliament, with whom we have discussed concept of legacy in politics from the guise of President Joe Biden's personality, some of the actions taken under his term, and many other related issues, in particular in the context of wider US-China confrontation with its implications and many other moments of import. Looking forward to welcoming you to the next episode of Dialogue of Civilizations.